Hello, everyone, and welcome to Future Nonprofit, a podcast and YouTube channel where we sit down with industry experts, both in and out of the nonprofit space, to talk about how to build and scale the nonprofits our world needs tomorrow. I'm your host, Ted Vaughn, the co-author of Culture Built My Brand and the co-founder of Historic Agency. If you have not yet checked out the audio version of Future Nonprofit, it is a highly produced, amazing 20 to 30-minute journey through each of our guests' stories. Be sure and check that out. Like and follow us wherever you get your podcasts or here on YouTube. And I hope you really enjoyed today's episode. We talked to some amazing people. All right, so a couple of icebreaker questions. If you were giving a speech on a big stage or presenting to an audience, and you had to have opening music, you had to have your walk-in track, what would you choose? What would be the Jim Moriarty walk-on music?
I would probably say London Calling by The Clash.
Why?
It's just impossible to ignore, and it demands your sonic attention as well as your brain. Every part of it is just a cry to take over your attention.
So gentle and...
yeah, it's not Yanni.
It's not Kenny G. All right. Last icebreaker question. If you're talking to an 8-year-old and you need to explain in one quick sentence what you do for a living, what's your profession, your career? What do you do today to make a living? What would you say?
If I was talking to an 8-year-old, I would say, hey, you know how your parents help you navigate the world, know what to do, what not to do? The golden rule, all those things. That's essentially what I do for brands.
Nice.
Help them navigate the world.
Help them grow up to big, strong, healthy brands.
Yeah, I think we all, whether we're an individual or a brand, we're always navigating how to optimally live in the world. And same as an 8-year-old.
I want to start with story of origin. I find everybody I've talked with on this show, there's some experience, person, maybe traumatic, maybe positive experience in their early years that ties directly today to the stuff they're doing or the convictions they hold. Or what is that for you? What's the memory or the person or the experience that has kind of most shaped Jim Moriarty into the person he is today and has inspired or shaped the work that you do?
Yeah, it's absolutely my father. And there's two things related to my father that shaped my entire life and shaped what I'll do the rest of today and tomorrow and for the rest of my life. The first one is a simple belief that no one is better than anyone else. And so whether I've met a number of different presidents of the United States, and whether you're talking to like that level of individual or you're talking to someone who's a year into their career, I honestly, in my heart, see them as the same level of importance. And so my dad taught me that. The second thing my dad taught me is there's a whole world out there and you need to be in that world. My dad was in deep China before it was open. He was in Russia during Perestroika, where he couldn't land planes in Moscow because there were mob cars on the runway. They lived in Austria. They lived in Australia. And all that time, he basically showed me to get out and see the world and be in the world. And so it's a combination of those two things that's always guided me.
How has your work today kind of delivered on those values? Is it that you chose work that would allow you to travel and see the world, or is it more how you approach your work, whether you're traveling or not?
I think those two things from my dad have given me a lot of confidence where a lot of other people just didn't have it. So in the early days of tech, you were literally building something from nothing. The internet and the web coming into the forefront in the mid-90s, e-commerce, AI, all the stuff in tech. The same with the environmental movement, even just jumping from one to another. If you're comfortable in a career, why would you jump to another sector twice? And it kind of comes from just like the experience I had with my dad, moving to Australia my freshman year in college. My parents moved, and I just thought that was the coolest thing in the world. I was so proud of them. And that gave me confidence to not see downsides as many people do. I tend to have a very different risk tolerance because I know at the end of the day, even if you break your bones, that's actually not that big of a deal. I don't mean to be hyperbolic, but it actually isn't that big of a deal. And transitioning that into a career, it's made jumping sectors easier. Not easy, but easier.
So take me on the journey of your career path. So you have this incredible experience growing up, incredible role model in your dad, and now you're on this path. Where did you start, and how did it connect the dots to where you are today?
Yeah, there's a couple of milestones. The first one is we got married straight out of college, been married 40-something years right now. But we moved to New York City without jobs. So the big kind of attribute of kind of the first years was we moved to New York with no jobs. And that seemed hard to a lot of people. It seemed kind of less hard to us. You get your first job, you get your second job, and then you get a decent job. So the first chapter was tech. It was a storage, computer storage company. And then I did big tech, small tech, worked for SAP out of Germany, did an AI company 20 years ago. And I loved tech because it was innovation. It was creating something out of nothing. It was different than tech is today. It was more aspirational, more idealistic, and less kind of greed oriented. And then I pivoted. A Googler put my name in the hat to run Surfrider Foundation, and I was a very unlikely leader for that organization. I didn't want to work in the nonprofit sector. The decade I worked there, I didn't want to work in the nonprofit sector. And there's a reason for that. And the short version of that reason is I see the nonprofit sector as kind of slow. And they run on what I call business light. And what I mean is they just don't have the professional rigor and kind of insatiable desire to move fast. And then after Surfrider, I was going to go back into tech, and I became obsessed with the brands that we were working with at Surfrider. Brands like Volvo, Barefoot Wine, just these, whether they were small brands or big brands. I absolutely loved that idea of the biggest canvases possible. And shaping them, moving them half a degree or 1 degree towards something positive in the world. And that's kind of what I've been doing. That's the third act of my professional life and what I do now.
When you think about the thread that has kind of woven through those different acts, what is it? What's the consistent thing that has been true of you or of the work you've done across all three?
It's relevance in the future. I'm a person, this is always sounds odd to say, but I live in the future. I have never really lived in today, and that sounds like I'm like propping myself up with that, but there's actually a huge downside to that. You're never actually paying attention. You're paying less attention to what's relevant today and what's happening today. And so in the early days of tech, it was absolutely about that. The environmental movement is absolutely about that. What are we going to preserve for tomorrow and our kids in 10 years or 20 years down the road? And the brands right now, there's a word that I've used over and over, and it's decadal. A lot of people tell me it's not a word. I think it is a word, and I tell leaders to think decadally. Like everyone talks about, like, oh, I want to build 100-year brand. Well, do you really? Why are you making this quarter decisions if you want to build a 100-year brand? And so, what would you do if you were building a 100-year brand? What would you prioritize? How would you do it? What would you invest in? And that's essentially its relevance in the future is kind of the thread that goes through all of them.
I know a little bit about you, your life, and it seems like your life outside of work has in many ways required you to be very tethered to the present.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we decided to adopt twins one with special needs 30 years ago. And yeah, so that part of it is absolutely positively must be in the present. And honestly, that's a hard part of my life. As my wife Andrea has said, she's writing her third book right now, and there's a line in the book, I wouldn't hire Jim to have the job of, Reed's roommate or caregiver. And I think that's just accurate. It's not a strength of mine. I'm not in the present as much. I'm not good with details of how to get from point A to point B, because all those things always feel irrelevant to me. Like that's what computers are for. But yeah, that's a tension in my life of how do I show up for people today when my head is somewhere else. And that's kind of what I was saying. That's the downside of just living in the future.
What's the stuff that you find great joy in, that when you are in the present, you're finding love, joy, life-giving? What are the things?
The first thing that comes to mind is surfing and foiling. So I've surfed for like 30 years. I've skateboarded before that, snowboarded and stuff. But you cannot do any of those things, whether you're skateboarding in an empty pool or snowboarding backcountry or foiling, without being literally 100% focused on what you're doing right now, because you'll get hurt. And I've broken a lot of bones getting hurt and, probably being less focused. So that, and just anything that's creative, there's something, I don't know where this fits in strengths or profile or attributes, but there's something about me that I kind of can't go to sleep at night until I've created something. And that could be a blog, that could be a painting, that could be anything, but I have to create something. Or I don't feel whole. I don't feel like myself. And I think that creativity is like, if I only surfed, I just got out of the water, 45 minutes ago. Surfing answers a lot of that for me, because you just have to be in the moment. You have to be creating. You have to find your line.
Yeah, it's funny. I just got out of the water 45 minutes ago too, but it was the pool at the Boys and Girls Club swimming laps. It's the same thing though. You can't detach from swimming laps or you'll run into the wall. There's a certain zen to the back and forth for me that is really helpful.
Yeah, it takes your mind off everything else.
Okay. So you have always struck me, Jim, as a provocative thinker. You have ideas. You're not seeking to provoke, but your ideas by nature of their, maybe provocative people or ideas or outlines tend to, poke a little bit. I assume there's a little bit of that's by design. It's your brand. It's your vibe.
It's not something I try at. It's actually something I try not to be, because in most cases, it doesn't work out well for me. Just to put that out there.
When you say it doesn't work out well for you, help me understand that, because typically I think people who have a passionate point of view and are willing to poke the bear and say interesting things that might not be intuitive or accepted or safe, that works for them. How does it not work? What's the downside?
So under Enneagram, I am a challenger.
You're an 8 all day. Yeah.
Yeah. So punk rock was always perfect for me. So here's an example where it didn't work out. I won't say the brand here because I know this person, but I was in a room with the brand of a top 10 global brand, consumer brand, and with all his lieutenants around him. And he asked me a question about the Super Bowl ad. And I said very honestly, I'm like, it wasn't that good. And he's like, what the hell are you talking about? How can you tell me our Super Bowl ad wasn't good? And I compared and contrasted it with another technology brand, which was a comparable that did an excellent job. And I'm just like, you asked me a question, I'm going to tell you the truth of what I see. And he hated that. I basically kind of dressed him down in front of everyone. So from a tactful standpoint, a timing standpoint, it just didn't work out well. I mean, he used us and they paid us a lot of money and all those things, but it didn't. I don't think he'll ever work with me again.
Interesting. Yeah, I guess speaking truth to power has its consequences if you're not constantly thinking about diplomacy and reading the person in the room and all that.
Yeah, and that goes back to what my dad taught me. I'm just like, I don't see this guy any better than the person who, the Uber driver that drove me there, and I'm going to treat them the same way, and that doesn't always work out well.
You strike me as somebody who has a very consistent point of view around life, and it continues to, in some ways, I think, the context changes, the brands you serve change, the environments you're in change, but the point of view doesn't. How would you summarize your point of view on the world, on life, on just what is the Jim Moriarty point of view, meaning the conviction that drives you or that informs? I mean, we already talked about your dad, but I'm just talking about when it comes to your work with brands.
Well, my work with brands is different than like how I view life. I would say how I view life is the single word that always pops for me is balance. I'm the person who doesn't take meetings before 10 a.m. because I'm surfing, and that is important to me. So that's been a through line through my whole life. When it comes to brands, I see kind of an opportunity with capitalism, and the opportunity is both to lean into capitalism and then to leverage capitalism. And that's pretty much of a through line through my whole life. I believe in making money, but I also believe that money is the most malleable tool in the world. And whether it's personal money or a brand's budget, I'm just infatuated with how capitalism can be bent towards positive good. I believe that's possible. I know people very close to me don't believe it's possible, but I do. I don't view capitalism as a bad thing. I view it as an aspirational thing.
There's this term in the nonprofit space called philanthrocapitalism, and I'm sure you've heard it before. It's the idea that people would just as soon purchase from a do-good brand, a good works brand, than give to the nonprofit space. So one of the threats to philanthropy is a generation who finds doing good in the world through consumer choices, and they'll direct money that way and not to nonprofits. In fact, nonprofits to them are just a tax status more than a helpful institution to be supported. What are your thoughts on the broader nonprofit space and the, if you will, competition coming into their space through brands that are trying to do more good, or at minimum saying they're trying to do more good in the world? Maybe they're not. They certainly don't operate with the same transparency that nonprofits are forced to operate with.
That's debatable. So, but if there's a spectrum of nonprofits on one side and brands on the other side, I am absolutely on the brand side. And there's a number of reasons for that. I mentioned one earlier. I don't really believe that the nonprofit accounting status is a big enough distinguisher to run a business with less rigor than businesses that don't have that. That's a tax status. One of the worst questions I was ever asked came from a guy who, as I was interviewing for the Surfrider Foundation CEO job, and this person asked me, why do I want to work in the nonprofit sector? And I leaned in and I said, there is not a single bone in my body that wants to work in the nonprofit sector. I want to work on this mission. And the fact that you're bringing up an accounting status, like, what did you want me to say? And he's like, well, now that I'm in this age, I want to give back to society. I'm just like, yeah, that's not me. I want to advance this mission, and there happens to be an accounting status that makes it a nonprofit. I do not believe that nonprofits live in a separate world. I believe that they live in the same world. They're competing for attention. They're competing for mind share. They're competing for heart share. They're competing for everything in the same way that Starbucks is, Google is, ChatGPT is, or OpenAI. Vans, Adidas, Nike, everyone's competing for the same attention. And I don't think consumers pause and say, wait, are you a 501c3 or 501c4? Or can you lobby? It's just like, that's something that actually nonprofits think. Today's Giving Tuesday. Yeah, that's good. But, I'm going to get back and order my latte or something. That's just not how culture thinks, I don't think.
When you were CEO of Surfrider, maybe you tried this and I didn't know it, but if you could wave a magic wand and use your role and authority and influence to turn Surfrider into a for-profit organization, would you?
I probably would. Yeah, I probably would.
Why? What would the advantage be?
The advantage would be efficiency, rigor, innovation. There's something that I've seen in multiple nonprofits that you just do not see in for-profits, and that is zombie programs or zombie campaigns. And what I mean by that, and you also don't see that much untethered mission creep. You do see mission creep, that's debatable. But what I mean by zombie programs, in a for-profit institution, whether you're a startup or you're Alphabet, if a line of business is not performing, it is cut. People don't cry. People don't, talk behind their back that, the BlackBerry is no longer available and Nokia should bring it back. It was an underperforming line, so it was cut. On the nonprofit side, and I totally understand why this happens, because the ideas and causes and missions at the center of every nonprofit is a noble one. It's a beautiful one. The people that work there are usually earnest and they're well-meaning and they're good people and all those things. But they try to do too many things with not enough resources. And the for-profit side has just a brutal profit motive that says, if it's not working, stop doing it. And on the nonprofit side, I found at Surfrider and in other organizations that I've been associated with, things would pop up 3 years later, and I'd be like, I thought we all agreed to cut that. I thought we all agreed to stop doing that. Well, it's important to the mission. Yeah, that's not the question. The question is, how can we most effectively use, in nonprofits' case, donor dollars or foundation dollars or membership dollars or grant dollars? How can we use those the most effectively and efficiently? And I've just seen that as over and over again as kind of an Achilles heel of that mindset and sector. And I just didn't fit in well with it, because for me, if you have 15 programs, you should always be looking at the bottom performing ones, and you should understand the metrics of why one is performing better than another. You should have a clear dashboard of what's working, what's not working.
So I think what's interesting to me about what you're saying is you work with brands that clearly have that. You're working with
100%
Fortune 500 brands that have that, and it's got to be super inspiring. And, I spend my life working with brands who have different problems. You spend your life working with these brands who have other problems. But at the same time, part of your job is in many ways to get them to steward resources and give money away and think like a nonprofit in some ways, right? There's this irony to...
No, there isn't. Well, the first thing I would correct you on is I absolutely work with global top 10 kind of brands. But right now I'm an advisor on 2 startups that are kind of sub $10 million brands, and they wrestle with the exact same things. And in many ways, they're more efficient at making those decisions because things are more clear to them. They have their house, mortgaged to make this work. So that's the first thing of just it's not just that Nike has money and can do things. It's that every brand wrestles with the same things. Your second question is probably the most important one, though, and that is, aren't you trying to do the same things? Isn't Nike trying to act like a nonprofit? And I would say, no, they're not trying to act like a nonprofit. They're trying to deliver on an idea. And the idea may intersect with some other nonprofit's idea. But, Nike is about seeing everyone as an athlete. We wrote their purpose playbook. The idea at the center of that playbook was taking down the barriers that prevent access to sport. So that could be a nonprofit's mission. take down barriers that prevent access to sport. And we're going to start with, something in Chicago or in Santa Monica or wherever it is. And we're going to, have programs that deliver more access to sport for kids that don't have access to sport. Take kids to the beach, give them soccer lessons, whatever it is. The reason that it's Nike's not just trying to act like a nonprofit is because that's part of their business. If they don't do that, they'll actually sell less product. If Nike didn't have a mission as expansive as that, and this actually applies to pretty much every brand in the world, their purposes and their missions are huge. They're absolutely floating 50,000 feet above the company. There's no way any brand that I've ever worked for will ever achieve their purpose. They're that big. The reason that they all matter is tied to their market share and their market cap. Nike is more valuable when more people are athletes, when more people buy athletic gear. Like the hijab, the hijab that they did was absolutely brilliant. I wish I could say I had some connection to that, but I didn't. But as you think of a hijab and the mission of taking down barriers that prevent access to sport, all of a sudden you've got an entire zone of the world, the Middle East and various places elsewhere, where half of the population can now ice skate. They can do fencing, they can do swimming, they can play basketball, they can be skateboarders. Why? Because Nike's giving them a way in. And does that intersect with some nonprofit's way to bring people into sport? Sure. But Nike doesn't see themselves as a nonprofit. They see themselves as a brand in the world that makes a difference in people's lives. And it's not a tax where they're just trying to throw money at some cause marketing program. It's actually central to their business. It helps their business. It drives their business. That's the idea of brand citizenship. That's what I've been doing for the last 15 years. I believe that brands, when they lean into who they really are, is half about making money and half about making a difference. And that's the whole idea of brand citizenship. But they're not trying to become some half-baked nonprofit. They're trying to become a fully baked capitalist entity that lives the idea. And that's what I've said to a lot of different chief marketing officers or CEOs or whatever, is either change your idea or deliver on it. But don't put this thing up there in the lunchroom or on your website or whatever, and then not take it seriously. And most people that I've dealt with over, the last kind of 25 years on this issue at Surfrider and then beyond, they do take it seriously. People do work at companies because they do believe in the mission. They do see kind of the intersection of their purpose of their lives and the purpose of their business as having some connective tissue.
It reminds me of what I say to chief human resource officers about culture, that your culture being healthy has to be a means to a business end. If a healthy culture is its own end, it atrophies and actually doesn't get healthy. It's healthy when it's tethered to something bigger than itself.
Yeah. There are so many examples of this. We did a bunch of Google projects. One of them was they have this Google Impact Challenge. It takes many forms around the world. But part of it was that Google really had an issue in the Bay Area, and the Impact Challenge was about taking some amount of money, I don't know how much it was, and essentially putting in the hands of Bay Area residents. So we turned bus shelters into digital voting signs. You could actually touch the screen and vote and direct funds. We did this thing called Smart Paper. It looked like a paper poster, but it was actually electronic, and you could vote. And so we kind of took the power of Google and we said, okay, Bay Area, you've got this money. Where do you want it to go? And it was Google essentially leaning into themselves as nerds and as kind of information people, but also understanding that they are part of the Bay Area.
So you have an expertise and a lot of experience working for for-profit brands, and yet you've been the CEO of a nonprofit brand. So you understand both. What about nonprofits what nonprofits do you respect and why? What about a nonprofit would lead you to respect it or feel compelled to give to it?
Yeah, my favorite nonprofit in the world for the longest period of time has been charity water. And I can't necessarily say in 2025 that's still the case because I just haven't connected with Scott, who founded it, in a bit. But the reason that I elevated charity water in my mind so high is because they lived their mission transparently. And that's why I pushed back earlier. This is why I pushed back earlier when you said nonprofits are transparent. I actually don't think nonprofits are any more transparent than most for-profits, but this nonprofit was transparent. So at this era, this is probably around 2010. If you gave Charity Water's thing was, if you give us $20, we'd give someone clean water for a year. So if I give you $100, is that 5 people? Yes. So it was just this really interesting kind of almost in and out kind of simplicity of just like, okay, here's the amount of money, here's what it does, done. But it wasn't, that's where most nonprofits, if they can get to that point, great. Charity Water then said, okay, so if you give us money, we're going to then tell you where it's going, what well it's going to, usually in Africa. We've partnered with Google, so we're going to let you know when that well is being dug. We're going to let you know that well is still running. We're going to show you a map and show you that transparency. We're going to transparently show you that your money is still at work, et cetera. So it was almost like Patagonia's Supply Chain Chronicles, but for giving. And the point isn't that everyone goes down that rabbit hole and says, I want to see where my $1,000 gift is still at work. But they gave you the ability to go as deep as possible. And I think that exists almost nowhere on the nonprofit side. There's a huge jump when you give $1,000 or $10,000 to an entity, and then you get a summary at the end of the year of what they've done. And it's in no way tied directly to your $10,000. It's all high-level reporting of impact. And I love the idea of an individual-based connection where you're going to tell me where $1, $10, $100, $1,000 is going to make a difference. And you're going to give me certainty around that impact. I love that.
I think this is why World Vision and Child Sponsorship has been so successful, because it checks all those boxes and scales.
Totally. I also understand that it's hard to do that across a nonprofit. You need unrestricted funds, you need campaign-specific funds, et cetera. So I understand this is part of the mix, but I'm just saying it's an important part of the cultural connection mix down at the individual level.
I want to get your take on a hot topic for me these days, and in some ways it's been inspired by conversations with you. The watchdog organizations in the nonprofit space, I believe, have become huge impediments to missional success or vision or innovation. They require such low spending that you literally will hear nonprofit board members say, well, we would rather spend 15% on overhead and only have 10 million revenue than have 30 million revenue, but up our percentage to 30.
Yeah.
It feels like there is this fear to spend money, which the for-profit space doesn't have.
That's another reason why I would shift something to the for-profit space. Yeah, I would, as I've said before, maybe to you, I think the nonprofit sector is architecturally hampered, and that's one of the ways it's architecturally hampered. We've been taught to look at overhead and judge effectiveness versus look at impact or return on investment, which is kind of the for-profit world of, I'm going to put $1 million in. What are you going to give me in return? There's even Elon Musk just got voted, I think, $1 trillion pay package. That's what it takes to make the headlines on the for-profit space. If someone makes, if Tim Cook makes $100 million or whatever, no one's batting an eye. And it's not that greed is good and let's give everyone, tens of millions of dollars. It's just like, no, people are judging Apple on the return on investment and the share price and innovation and how it's growing. And that's not the case in the for-profit sector. There's a TED Talk, I'm blanking on the guy's name, who did the AIDS work in New York City, and it's absolutely brilliant. And it's very sad because at the end of it, you're just like, okay, the nonprofit sector's broken.
Let's talk a little bit about the nonprofit leader. So we've covered a lot of ground about what's broken in the nonprofit space and why you would choose to, if you have the option to make more missional good in the world through the for-profit space.
Yep.
What advice would you give to a nonprofit leader who is in that system, trying to do good, willing to take risks, willing to push the envelope, open to sage advice, and in a place where they have permission to take risks? What would you advise? What would the risks be?
The first thing I would say is try to orient your entire staff, but starting with your leadership, towards for-profit thinkers and people with consumer brand experience. I think there's a blind spot across the nonprofit sector that they think that consumers think differently about nonprofits and for-profits. And I just think that's a very blurry spectrum. And I think that one of the ways that nonprofits can compete better with Nike, compete better with Starbucks, compete better for wallet share and mind share across all the consumer brands is to bring in more and more expertise from those sectors and do that in any way you can. If you can't hire a chief marketing officer, I'm working on one of the oldest, I'm not going to tell you who it is, but I'm working with one of the oldest nonprofits in the United States right now. And the journey is really going to be about helping them understand the importance of a CMO. And even if you can't get to that point where you're going to re-architect the leadership team, then find advisors. You need to compete on the most level playing field possible. And you're not going to compete on that playing field without that kind of talent, especially with the last 20 years of innovation and especially with the 20 years ahead of us. You're just going to get further and further behind. Trust in media, trust in governments, trust in nonprofits have all fallen via Edelman's trust barometer. The only one who's kind of treading water and doing well is corporations. That's a longer story. But if you want to compete and build trust, you're going to need more and more of those assets in the form of agencies or advisors or board members or staff. You're just going to need to get people closer to you so you can compete better.
What's the short story on corporations maintaining some degree of trust? Is it because ultimately people can see the value they provide and there's no weirdness around mission and blur and all that stuff?
No, I think the short version is around competency, a word that pops across the Edelman Trust Barometer for the last kind of 5 to 10 years is competency. It's kind of trust and competency. So do I trust you based on what you've told me? And the answer for media, with a broad stroke, is less and less so. The same applies to governments. Do I trust you based on what you've told me? Less and less so. I don't think anyone would argue with that. And the same for nonprofits. It's not that they don't trust, that's where it flips over to competency. So the reason that corporations have stayed and risen is, do I trust Nike to deliver on what they say they're going to do? Yeah, I actually do. You could say you might not trust OpenAI or you might not trust, but for all intents and purposes, you trust most corporate brands to deliver the product without having it be toxic, or something. You expect it to deliver what it says it's going to do. So part of it's trust. The second part's competency. And the competency part is where nonprofits fall and where for-profits rise. Do you believe that fill in the blank consumer brand? First of all, do you trust them? And second of all, do you deliver? Do you believe they have a competency on their staff to do what they said they're going to do? And the answer is yes. And that's where nonprofits continue to go down and for-profits continue to go up. And there's a bunch of sub-points. One of the sub-points is the value of the voice of the CEO continues to rise. So I think the brands with leaders that think they can just kind of sit on the sidelines, I would say that is an action. Silence is complicity. So you're either going to stand up for what you say you believe in, and you'll usually benefit from that, or fall to the wayside. And you can just see that across various brands where leaders are out front. It doesn't mean it's always going to work in your benefit, but it tends to over the long run.
What does being out front mean? Or what does maybe sitting on the sidelines mean in practical terms?
It means understanding what you believe, which is usually captured in a purpose or mission statement. There are themes and elements that are at the center of those things. And those are the issues or items or subjects that you should take a stand on. So if going back to Nike believes that everyone's an athlete and taking down barriers that prevent access to sport. So there's themes in there. There's access is probably at the center of that idea. And so if access is being taken away, and specifically access to sport or access to programs or access to funding for athletic programs in like an inner city school or a rural school or, something like that, if it's like a statewide issue and Nike says nothing, then people should call bullshit on it. And just like, you say this is important and why are you not engaging on it? The important distinction is sitting on the sidelines does not mean that you say something about everything in culture. It means having a singular lens, which is your mission or your purpose, and you're having a filter system for saying this is what we believe. We're out front. We've had this mission for 30 years or 100 years or however long. And so we've said it's important. This is why our employees work here. If something's happening in culture or government or wherever, could be in the United States or elsewhere, we should take a stand. Could be around non-toxic. One of the brands I work with is around non-toxic materials in the healthcare space. So if there's issues around toxicity and they don't say anything, well, they're kind of like they're letting their leadership potential essentially wither away. It doesn't mean they should take a stand on something that's unrelated to toxicity, and that's where a lot of brands get into trouble, is they feel like they need to weigh in on things that really are outside their purview.
Yeah, it's interesting hearing you unpack this perspective and also knowing some of the content that you've written on, especially the series of Charles Ponzi ran your brand, if Andy Warhol ran your brand. Yeah, it's great stuff. And I continue to see diminishing contrast between nonprofit and for-profit. I see a lot of contrast in how they're run, but in terms of how they should be run or what they're attempting to do, almost everything you've written applies to a nonprofit.
Could, yeah, and some of them apply even more so to. Before this podcast, I was thinking about the nonprofit for-profit thing, and I think a healthy way to think about it isn't in a binary way of one or the other. I think a good way to think of it is actually a spectrum. And so on one end of the spectrum, you could have the most profit-driven companies possible, and you could put something like an Exxon. I mean, you can put your own brands in there. I actually asked ChatGPT to kind of structure this out for me, but on one end of the spectrum, you have like an Exxon, or you just like, we're going to drill everywhere, and we kind of care less about other things. And then as you go down towards the other side, you start to hit like Goldman Sachs and other stuff like that. Somewhere in the middle, you have like the Patagonias, which are really trying to straddle both sides as well as they can. And then as you go further, you get into kind of the Gates Foundation, all that other stuff, and for-profits and stuff like that. And I think for me, the spectrum way of thinking about it is really important. And the series that I'm writing about putting historical figures into kind of the chief marketing officer role, like Charles Ponzi he would be a star today. He would absolutely be a star chief marketing officer because he sold tomorrow before it arrived. That's essentially what he did. And we call that a confidence man. or confidence woman. They're essentially selling something that doesn't exist. Interestingly, though, James Baldwin, and I'm writing one for the holidays with Jesus. If Jesus was your chief marketing officer, how would he run the brand? And for me, those are just great thought experiments because they help me understand kind of what leaders should wrestle with, not necessarily how they should act, but what they should wrestle with, especially if they hold some historical figures in high esteem. Like if you're a Christian and you work with brands, whether it's for-profit or nonprofit, well, that's an interesting question of just like, okay, what would Jesus do? What would Jesus do as my chief marketing officer? I just think that's a really rich space to wrestle with. And it's not about getting it right. You're never going to get it right, but you're going to make some interesting kind of, if you wrestle with it long enough, I think you'll find some interesting things. I have one coming out on Oscar Wilde. And yeah, they all have really interesting kind of points of view.
I think it'd be an interesting experiment to say, okay, so you did this on Andy Warhol, and Andy Warhol, you talked about the social commentary and how he would, juxtapose these two opposing messages in one piece of art, or demonstrate a theme through extreme repetition. What if Andy Warhol ran your nonprofit? What comes top of mind, Jim Moriarty? What would Andy Warhol do if he ran a $50 million nonprofit?
Well, it depends what the focus would be. But I think, like Andy Warhol, if Andy Warhol was chief marketing officer at Jeep, I really do think he would lean into this mall crawler kind of thing where people spend $150,000 on a Jeep with the most tricked out four-wheel drive stuff, and the Jeeps never see dirt. And he would accept that and embrace it. He wouldn't be embarrassed by it. So if he ran a nonprofit, if Andy Warhol ran Surfrider Foundation, what would he do? I think he would kind of embrace some of the cliches, and he wouldn't shy away from them. He wouldn't try to outsmart you and try to do a, divert your attention. He would embrace your kind of generalizations, and he would play that back so that you could see yourself in it. There's an Oscar Wilde thing that kind of don't imagine yourself as you are, imagine yourself as how you were edited. And as you think of every single person on Instagram, that's essentially an edited version of themselves. That's so Oscar Wilde. It's not about truth. It's about the fake truth. And it's about a curated truth. And so I think you can put almost any, what would Sun Tzu or Abe Lincoln, what if he ran your nonprofit? What would he do? The Jesus one is super interesting to me because there's you could take the red letter Bible and essentially apply it to how would the red letter Bible input and influence your decisions on, 2026 funding. I think you'd come up with some uncomfortable truths really fast.
Your recent post about Charlie Kirk and Mamdani and demonstrating the network effects, if you will, of how they each accomplished their mission, and the having a central narrative, having a distributed network, the field activation, and then just the constant feedback loop. I was thinking, oh my gosh, this is what every nonprofit needs. They need a clear central narrative. They need network distribution. I mean, right? This was written for a nonprofit.
100%. Here's the truth behind that post. So I wrote that post a month ago about Charlie Kirk only. And then I wrote it about a bunch of leaders, and then Mamdani. And the reason I didn't put it live is there's just so much blowback. You mentioned Charlie Kirk's name, and half the room, writes you off. And same thing with Mamdani. The other half of the room writes you off. But I think the point that I was trying to get to is exactly what you saw, and that is that these two people were incredibly successful. And why were they incredibly successful? And there's a message at there's a playbook at the center of both of those that apply not only to every nonprofit brand, but also consumer brands. And that is that the world has changed. And the first way that it's changed in kind of the last 20 years is everything went digital. And I think we've over-indexed on that way. So people they may have, an ass-kicking social game, but they never show up. And I think what Charlie Kirk did and Mamdani did is they not only had a great digital game, they had a great in-person game. And I think that's a huge opportunity for brands and leaders today, is to show up, to press flesh, to listen to people, to not just talk and leave. And I just think that Kirk and Mamdani's rise and the acceleration of that rise. Mamdani was essentially no one 3 years ago, and now he's the mayor of arguably one of the most important cities in the world. It doesn't matter. You can take their ideology and judge them on that separately. We're talking about systems. We're talking about engine and efficiency. And I just think something that we do with every brand is we work with is we always look at unlikely candidates, and it always makes everyone uncomfortable when, if you're working with United Healthcare, which we did, and we focused on Humans of New York, they're just like squinting and saying, what are you doing? Like, Humans of New York is an amazing brand, which actually is not a nonprofit. I thought it was. But those are the places I think you can learn the most. So there's so much to be learned. I'm not sure anyone did from that post, but I loved writing it.
Well, from the nonprofit framework, it's incredibly helpful. And I think one of the things you said about showing up, I think that goes back to what does it mean to not sit on the sidelines? It means you are active and engaged and listening. It's like Jack Welch walking the line. In many ways, that's what we see in Kirk and Mamdani, is people who knocked on doors, who were willing to hear critical feedback, who, if anything, they were creating settings where it could happen.
Yeah, there's another thing that I think both of them did. I haven't read this anywhere else, but it came to me that they almost acted like stand-up comedians, not in their messaging, but if you think of a stand-up comedian is always calibrating. They're always testing material, and then they adjust the material for the next show. And because of the cadence, because of the engagement, because of the in-person, it wasn't, they could test messaging and lines, and they weren't looking at analytics. They were looking at faces, and they could adjust and align. You could say the same thing of Donald Trump has done a great job of that, or Bernie Sanders or Obama. A lot of those people, what Kirk and Mamdani did differently, I think, there was a cadence of in real life engagement that allowed them to calibrate, and that calibration instantly fed an entire kind of system of programming that could go online, could go anywhere. So I think that's one of the biggest takeaways, is almost think like a stand-up comedian and just always be calibrating. It doesn't mean you're always playing to the audience and you're changing who you are, but you're looking to see what is connecting with people and what is not.
If you were speaking to a room of, actually, I'm going to ask you two questions, the same framework, two different audiences. You're invited to share one cogent, salient idea that you believe this room needs to hear, and there are two audiences. One is nonprofit leaders who are like 0 to 5 million. They're just getting going, but they have traction. They have something that works, and they're trying to figure it out. The other room are nonprofit leaders that are $75 million in revenue or greater. And they're likely, they've got history, they've been around for a while, they're established, and their concerns are different. They're trying to figure out change or navigating the future. Maybe it's the same message, maybe it's different. But what's the one thing that you think you would want to instill in their brains if you could?
I think I'd tell both of them the same thing. And that is to study the most effective communicators in any part of culture, in any part of the world, and understand why they're effective, understand why they're connecting, and how they're connecting, what methods they're using. And it kind of goes back to the Kirk and Mamdani post of just like, always look at unlikely candidates and learn the most you can that's applicable to you. That could be that you as a brand leader are looking at individuals, like a political leader or some other kind of evangelist. It could be that you're looking at brands. Like, why is Trader Joe's the number one brand at that recent Harris poll comparison? They are above Nike, they're above Apple, they're above everyone else. Why? Is anything that's related to the top 5 brands in terms of the most influential brands in the world, is there anything that's applicable to us? And the last part of that is, you can look at individuals, you can look at brands or organizations. You can also look at movements. My sense is that we live in this era of movements. And there's a reason that we live in this era of movements. And the reason that we live in this era of movements is that there are 8 billion people on Earth, and there are 20 billion devices connected to the internet. Virtually everyone on the globe is engaged, has a voice, and is using that voice. And so if you're a leader, I would look at whether it's a movement, and it doesn't need to be in your sector. We've looked at the Me Too movement. We looked at plastics. We've looked at anti-smoking. We've looked at vaping, OxyContin. We've looked at Black Lives Matter. We've looked at a lot of different, the Truth campaign, which was a 72 and Sunny campaign. Learn from the best. And the best are typically not your competitors. The best are outside your realm. And so that's what I would just say, become obsessive about studying who's winning mind share and culture, and why. There's an important subtext to this, though. I would say discount anyone who's buying it. So, like, honestly, every Super Bowl ad I've ever seen is essentially a throwaway. Who cares? The only thing a Super Bowl ad says is, you have money. What I'm really saying is, who is earning respect? Who is earning your wallet? Who and why? And advertising spend is a very cheap way of trying to fast track that. It's a piece of the equation, but it's really not, in my opinion, the long-term win.
Yeah, it's the marketing fluff that's important for brand engagement and awareness, but it's not the long road. It's not the relationship. It's not the brand equity.
Yeah, and the other part of that is, like, a brand like Volvo or IKEA. They are so important to learn from. Or Lego. So this Lego, there's a single word at the center of virtually everything Lego does today across every one of their kind of platforms and across the last 5 or 6 decades that they've been around. And that word is play. And so whether they're doing a film, or whether they're doing a theme park, or whether they're doing a collaboration with Star Wars, on everything is around play. The single word for Volvo is safety. And it's not just that they say safety a lot, it's that they've made decisions to make their cars go slower because of safety.
Yeah, they invented the 3-point seatbelt.
And you know that. So if you're a leader of a small nonprofit, like, who are you learning from? What is your version of safety for Volvo?
Yeah, or what is the central theme that so galvanizes your cause or your movement or your nonprofit that you orientate everything around it?
Yeah, and you could just say, like, distill that down in the plainest speak, so that if you're talking to your friend's mother, what would you say you do so that she would understand it in 10 seconds or less, or 15 seconds or less? So Volvo's, we make cars safer. Done. I got it. But the point is really, look outside your lane. And that's where the Kirk Mondami, I was really trying to push people of just, like, stop putting up blinders so you're not learning from people that are doing it the best. You can judge their ideology separately, and good on you for doing that, but learn from who's doing it well.
We often do a point of view exercise with faith-based brands, and it's amazing how often you realize how often the exercise reveals that they have no actual point of view beyond Jesus. And, my phrase time and time again is, listen, Jesus isn't a point of view. Like, you need a point of view on.
Yeah.
What is that point of view that then? Okay. What did we not talk about, Jim, that you think we should have?
No, I think the one, I might not be the right person to talk about this, but as a Christian, I'm concerned. And I think the issue is the Christian brand is a damaged brand in my mind. It's a damaged concept. And I don't see it getting better. And I see silence as making it worse. My favorite leaders in the Christian sphere have not been silent. That does not mean they're partisan at all, but it means they are scripturally based and they're actively engaged with community. They're listening, they're talking, they're leading, they're praying. But the Christian movement has been co-opted and is damaged. And I think that's something we didn't talk about. And it's hard to know where to enter that one because there's so many kind of different angles. But as a brand, I'm essentially an obsessively unsatisfied person who studies brands, and I'm just sad.
Well, let's talk just briefly about it. When you say the Christian movement, what does that mean to you, or what does that include? Because I look at that phrase and I can find about 11 different movements within the Christian movement.
So the Christian movement used to be, regardless of what it used to be, I would say Christianity is being connected to non-Christian fundamentals. If you would just take Christ, and then you take the red letter Bible, and you take everything that Jesus Christ said. So I'm not talking about the entire Bible. I'm talking about everything that Jesus said. It's very clear that his number one push was love. Love the Lord, number one, love each other, number two. There kind of wasn't a three. So love and acceptance and the stranger and the woman at the well and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, everything that he did and said is very incongruent with pulling into a church parking lot. This happened to me. Pulling into a church parking lot, and the guy who was helping park cars had a MAGA hat on. I walked up to the pastor and said, I feel like leaving because that is an exit cue for me. If this is a church that is picking that specific side, which is so incongruent with what Jesus's teachings on loving the stranger, the other, then I'm going to leave. And the pastor said to me, I can't control what people wear. And I said, you can control who is welcoming people into your parking lot. So no, you can't control the dress code, but you can pick people that aren't going to look like a Proud Boy as you're going to church. And so that's what I mean by it's been co-opted. And it doesn't mean that I'm a hardcore leftist. I'm not. I voted right as much as I voted left. My point is that it's been co-opted in the most grotesque ways that I didn't think I'd ever see. Rubber bullets used to quell a crowd so a president could stand with a Bible in his hand. That's what I mean by a damaged brand.
Yeah, and maybe I think the heart of that damage is less about the side, it's more about the affiliation, that there was never meant to be the political church alignment. And in fact, whenever you see that over time in history, the spiritual movement that gets co-opted or assimilated into a political agenda never ends well.
No, I agree with you. It's not really about one side or the other. It's just being misused. And I think the Christian leaders have allowed that for all intents and purposes. They've allowed it because they haven't wanted to ruffle the waters.
Yeah, I think faith is designed to provide a framework for how to live life, which means it will have a critique for any political system or ideology. It can never be sufficient. So if we co-opt the two, then we're leveraging scripture to support a political ideology and then allowing it to live blind to its own issues and weaknesses. We actually can't critique the President Trump because he is too important to our movement. We've conflated the two, which means now we can't speak truthfully about gaps.
Yeah, and I'm sure there'll be a Democrat in the future, a Democrat in the past that we made the same mistake. So it really isn't about necessarily one side or the other. It's just about what you just said.
Yeah, and I think there's probably a huge shift in the future around nonprofits that are successful. I mean, I can't tell you how many nonprofits have the word American and then, fill in the blank, Bible or national American, heritage blank. I mean, like there's just so many where just the brand itself is being given finances because of the political association as much as the spiritual agenda.
Yeah.
It's dangerous. It
is dangerous. I agree. But I think, one thing that I learned during the first Trump administration is America is truly, the United States, there are 37 countries in America, but we have kind of claimed that word. The United States is an experiment, and not all experiments survive. So I'm actually not one of the people that, I don't believe the United States is going to live forever. California is the fourth largest economy in the world.
Yeah, it was an experiment that's offered history in the world tremendous good. Whether it continues, it's one thing's for certain: it won't continue as it was known even a decade ago, right? I think the other piece is by conflating the two, you actually end up, I think, robbing a political party of the good they might be able to do. You know how many people actually don't give Republicans credit for good things because of that affiliation, because of that, right? I mean, it's actually not, I don't think, ultimately going to work to the advantage of the Republican Party to have that alignment with the evangelical church.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. But, I actually love evangelical churches. Those are my favorite kind. But because, I think we kind of sorted it out.
No way, finish that statement. Because there's a huge movement of people moving away from the evangelical church because they, maybe for the same reason that we were talking about brands. Because
when I think of like C.S. Lewis, and maybe the word evangelical is what I'm drawn to people like C.S. Lewis who thinks in ways that advance Christian thought, but does so in a way that cuts through kind of everything. And when I think of evangelism, I think of thinkers and I think of communicators. But I think that word evangelism has just been shifted, and now it's just loud, and it's like there's an American flag behind me, and I have an American flag pin on, and it's just silly.
For more stories from experts in the industry and to learn how to take your nonprofit into the future, like this video, subscribe to our channel and podcast, and visit makehistoric.com/insights. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Ted Vaughn, and this is Future Nonprofit.